Hi, everybody. PJ Kwong here. This is going to be a very exciting broadcast that we're bringing to you. I am delighted to be able to connect with co-founder from Little Footprints, Big Steps. We're talking about Morgan Wienberg. We're going to have a visit with Maxim-Billy Fortin, who those of you who know me from figure skating, Maxim-Billy Fortin was an adoptee from Haiti. And then we are going to be talking to Kelly Milner, producer and director of an amazing documentary called Not About Me. And Kelly's going to fill us in on the documentary. And the focus, of course, was Little Footprints, Big Steps. I am so excited that you've been able to join me today. But first up, let's go have a look a little bit about Morgan before I introduce her. So here we go.
My name is Morgan Wienberg, and I am co-founder and country director for Little Footprints, Big Steps. In 2010, I volunteered in Haiti for a few months following the earthquake, and I was introduced to a locally run orphanage. I ended up quickly learning that the majority of children in orphanages were actually not orphans. They had families, but the families were just too poor to look after them, which is the case of over 80% of children in orphanages worldwide. So I ended up creating Little Footprints, Big Steps in order to support local authorities in reuniting those children with their families and then following up to strengthen those families so they wouldn't feel the need to give up their children.
So sometimes you get the chance to meet earthbound angels, and that's what I feel about this particular young woman, Morgan Wienberg. Morgan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, PJ.
This is just a thrill. I am so interested in your story, and I want to know, you're 19 years old. You end up going to Haiti. Tell me why, how, and what happened.
Well, the first time I went to Haiti, I was actually 18, the very first time in 2010. Wow. And what drew my attention to Haiti was the devastating earthquake that hit in January of 2010. And when I saw it featured so prominently in the media, the devastation that this earthquake caused, it really moved me to want to do more than just fundraise and send funds. I wanted to connect with the victims. I wanted to just devote all of my time. So I ended up going to Haiti for the first time in the summer of 2010. Intending only to volunteer over the summer with this missionary organization. And when I got there, within the first week of arriving in Haiti, I was introduced to this locally run orphanage, where it was just the worst conditions I'd seen any human beings living in. And so one thing that I kind of took on was working with the children in that orphanage and trying to address their situation and improve the conditions. But that proved to be a lot more difficult than anticipated. And, at the end of my stay in Haiti during that first trip, I didn't feel I could just return to Canada and forget what I'd seen, knowing that the children would still be in those same conditions. So I did end up returning to Canada, but with a plan to return to Haiti and work with the children in that specific orphanage to try and change their living conditions.
I have to ask you, there's always a moment. There's that moment. And I want to know about that moment that led you to Little Footprints, Big Steps.
Oh, I think it's happened more than 10 years ago, but there's so many moments leading up to it. And it's interesting because I never intended, to start an organization. And a lot of it was really learning as I went along. But there are definitely some moments that stand out to me and that were huge learning pillars that guided the development of Little Footprints, Big Steps. When I returned to Haiti in the following year of 2011, on my 19th birthday, I actually went independently during that second trip, so not attached to any organization. Little Footprints hadn't been created yet. And I showed up at that orphanage, that locally run orphanage, asking if I could live there. So I did end up living there for 5.5 months as the only foreigner, again, with the intention of improving the conditions of the orphanage, because I thought that was the issue. And as I lived in the orphanage and began to learn Creole, the local language, and observe the corruption and exploitation occurring in that orphanage, it quickly became pretty clear to me that if I wanted to help these kids, it would mean getting them out of that orphanage, not improving the conditions within it. One example that really stands out to me is when I first arrived in the orphanage to start living there, the first 2 days, there was no drinking water for the children. They just had, I bought some juice and that's all they had for 2 days. And so one of the first things I tried to address was contacting an organization nearby and arranging water delivery for the orphanage several times a week. So now there was clean drinking water, a big water reservoir of clean drinking water filled up 3 times a week for those children. But despite having that clean drinking water available, the children would still be crying of thirst because they were too afraid to go and help themselves to the water. And they would be beaten if any of the adults running the orphanage saw them helping themselves to the water. So that was kind of a clear example of the fact that this orphanage is exploiting the children. It's a for-profit orphanage. So I saw 5 or 6 different NGOs coming and bringing support to that orphanage. But living there, I saw that none of that support was actually going to the children. There was another incident that really stands out for me, which was, all of the children would be bare feet, poorly clothed. And a shoe company came and, with videographers and the whole works, and fitted each child and gave them a new pair of shoes and handed out 5 soccer balls. But within 20 minutes of that group of foreigners leaving, the orphanage owner called all of these kids, made them take the shoes off of their feet and put them all in a suitcase. So within 20 minutes of them leaving, the children were all bare feet again. And that suitcase of shoes was never seen again. The orphanage owner ended up selling them for her own personal profit. So it became very clear to me that, living here is not an option if I want to improve the children's living conditions. But what confirmed that even more for me was, again, as I started to learn the language and develop trust with the children, I learned that of the 75 children living in that orphanage, at least 73 of them had living families who they missed and who loved them, and who they were separated from because of poverty. And this orphanage owner would go into very vulnerable communities and speak in churches and offer gifts and donations in communities in order to recruit children into her orphanage. But once they were in the orphanage, they were, not given the education and care that they were promised. They were instead mistreated and exploited to get profit for the orphanage owner. So once I realized how poor the conditions were inside the orphanage, I asked some of the kids, because at that point I was actually using my personal savings to try and support them. Little Footprints didn't exist yet. And I asked the kids, if I were to support you for your education anywhere you were in the country, where would you want to live? And they all said that they would want to live with their families. So that was kind of a turning point to me where I realized, okay, we need to be reconnecting these kids with their families and supporting them there. And it's the best way to actually protect them and their rights.
It's so interesting as you're talking about all of these issues. I mean, it's a problem that feels enormous. And I'm sure it's not a problem that is restricted to Haiti. I mean, across the world, as you mentioned in your statistics, 80% of children actually have family members who are living. They just don't have the resources to be able to care for their children. So, what do you do? How do you start? What was the first priority among so many priorities that required your attention?
It's definitely a huge issue, like you mentioned. I think at the time I was, I started with this specific orphanage and those specific children and quickly realized that this is a much bigger issue. Not only did I start reuniting the children in that orphanage with their families by, contacting the parents and following up once the parent reclaimed their child to ensure that when the child was home, they could go to school, they could have access to medical care and those different things. But I also started advocating at that point for the closure of that orphanage because there was abuse happening in that orphanage. The first couple of months as a foreigner, they tried to shield me from a lot of it. But after about 3 months of living there, they would beat children right in front of me. Children wouldn't lie to me anymore about what happened when they have bumps and bruises on their bodies. There was actually trafficking happening in the orphanage as well, which is quite common in orphanages. A lot of people don't realize it, but as a 19-year-old, I was offered 5 children for $800 each. And those children had parents, and the parents didn't send the children to the orphanage thinking that they don't want to ever see their children anymore. The parents often see it more like a boarding school. Sometimes children in orphanages even go to visit their families over the summer. And it's just an issue where the parents can't afford education for the children. And these orphanages are receiving support often from NGOs or foreign entities. So I did start advocating to shut down the orphanage.
Let me ask you a quick question, just so that our audience understands. You're not in any way shaming people or accusing people here of people have big hearts and they want to help. It's just that the help was not going where it was intended. Is that probably a fair statement?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I can take myself as an example. When I went to Haiti, the first thing I did was visit an orphanage. And, I felt so drawn to care for those children. I wanted to do anything to care for them. And of course, if you're seeing children who are noticeably starving, crying for attention, you're going to be more implied as a good person. You want to give whatever you have and care for those children and feed them. And it's very difficult to find out that by supporting an orphanage, oftentimes you're actually supporting this cycle of exploitation. Okay. Because the sicker the kids are, the more donations the orphanage owner gets. So it's this very sick and abusive cycle. But of course, people supporting the orphanage, have these good intentions and care about the children. And something I've seen is a bit of a disconnect between the local authorities and the NGOs or aid coming into the country, where, again, people with the best intentions come into the country and want to help the most vulnerable children, so they go to orphanages. Meanwhile, the government might actually be trying to close that very orphanage for abuse and exploitation. And if instead we connected with Haitian social services, for example, we would be able to find out, which orphanages are actually registered with the government and approved and respect, a minimum standard of care. Which situations are there foster families or vulnerable families approaching the authorities for support that we could help, so that those parents don't actually need to send their kids to orphanages. So it's all about, informing ourselves and helping in the best way. But so many people around the world are still under the impression that, supporting orphanages is helping the most vulnerable children. And it's kind of a hard pill to swallow, especially if you've been supporting orphanages for a long time, to realize that that might actually be harming the children. Even orphanages that have good living conditions, it's not ideal for children to grow up in institutions. It affects them developmentally.
We're going to come to one of your success stories in a little bit, but first of all, as Little Footprints, Big Steps, I'd like you to sort of talk to me a little bit about the programming that you offer and the services that you offer.
Yes. So as you mentioned, the problem is obviously a lot bigger than that one orphanage. As I started advocating to close that one orphanage, right away it was identified as needing to be shut down right away. But then there was the issue of where do we transfer these 75 children to so they can be in a safe place immediately while their families are all being traced, and that is being planned out. So that was one of the issues faced. And it was also one of over 600 orphanages that the government had identified and needing to be shut down. And the local authorities just don't have the resources to address that big of an issue without the support of NGOs and other agencies coming in to try and help children. So one of our main programs with LFBS is Transitional Safe Houses, which we have two of, one for boys and one for girls. And these are not orphanages. It's really important to make that distinction because we don't support children living in institutions. But again, this is actually helping reinforce the capacity of local authorities by providing a safe space where children can be cared for while their families or long-term placements are being identified. So in the safe houses, we not only receive children from orphanages that the government are shutting down, but also children who were living in the streets, children who were in situations of domestic slavery, which is called reste avec in Haiti, or sometimes children who are abandoned or lost, and again, need a safe space to go to immediately before being placed either in a foster home or reunited with their families. And all of the children we receive in the safe houses are referred to us by either Haitian Social Services or the Child Protection Brigade of the police. So we work very closely with the local authorities.
It's super interesting how all of this sort of has come to pass. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I have so much material that I want to get to. And one of the things that I want to talk about is you have had many successes. I mean, you've got, a program that helps to address small business. You've got programs that, in addition to the transitional safe housing, there are all kinds of other things. And this young man, Alexon, is seen here on the right, helping another child by tutoring. But this was his quote that just broke my heart. "I didn't have any good day during those 12 years. Just think about that for a moment. A child who never smiled for 12 years. So families are much better for children." Here's another picture of this young man, and he's involved with Little Footprints, Big Steps. Can you tell me about his story?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, the safe houses are just a small piece of what we do. The majority of work that we do is actually following up with families after they've been reunited. And we work with over 350 families in different areas across Haiti. So once the children are reunited, there is a need for consistent follow-up to ensure access to education, access to medical care, empower the parents so they are able to look after their children and don't risk sending them away elsewhere again. And Alexon, who you mentioned, is a young man who I originally met in that orphanage, the first orphanage that I went to when I came to Haiti. He was one of the children growing up in that abusive orphanage, which, as he referred to, he spent, I think, about 12 years in that orphanage, and it was not a very positive experience. Alexon ended up leaving that orphanage, I can say escaping that orphanage, and is now actually a staff member with Little Footprints, Big Steps. So he is our child and youth mentor, and he works very closely with the children coming into our transitional safe houses and following up with them once they've been reunited. So I think his capacity is so unique and incredible because not only has he gone through what a lot of these children are going through, he's also gone through the personal development of transitioning out of that, discovering what rights of his had been violated, discovering, the benefits of children growing up in families and outside of institutions, both through his personal experience and through the work of seeing children reunited. So he has just such a powerful capacity to connect with the children that we're working with and the youth that we're working with, and, is constantly reflecting on ways to improve what we're already doing. And then he also has this unique capacity to speak about the orphanage system in Haiti and the importance of reunification. So he, just a few years ago, gave a speech in One Young World conference in Europe. Lumos was actually the organization that facilitated him giving that speech. So he sat next to J.K. Rowling when he was giving it, and just spoke about his experience having gone through such an abusive orphanage system.
I'd love for you to tell me, we're going to turn the corner and go to our special guest, one of my skating pals, Maxim-Billy Fortin, who was born in Haiti and was adopted from an orphanage in Haiti. But before we do that, I'd love for you to give me three practical things that our audience can do to help Little Footprints, Big Steps.
Perfect. First of all, as we mentioned, we're not saying don't support these children. There is a reason why they were separated from their families. So there are needs that these children have that are not being met. But it's more sustainable and effective to support meeting the child's needs within their family as opposed to within an orphanage. So obviously, number one is if you want to support the work, you can donate, visit our website, littlefootprintsbigsteps.com, or in general, support community development and family preservation initiatives instead of institutions like orphanages. Second of all, something that anyone can do, regardless of their financial means, is to raise awareness. Raise awareness, not only spreading the word about Little Footprints, Big Steps in our work, but also in general, helping educate people about this issue that we're addressing. So more people are aware that of the damage that orphanages can do, and the importance of supporting families.
Families are key. And we didn't really realize, there's a mentality that thinks, oh, no, we'll look after them. Don't you worry. And obviously, kids are better off suited with their parents. And when the parents don't have the skills that they require or the resources, if we as a society can help support them, then everybody wins. That's the truth. I want to introduce you to a former skating genius who is from province of Quebec here in Canada, Maxim-Billy Fortin. This is a couple of shots of him early on in his skating career. That's how I know him. But what maybe you don't know is that he was born in Haiti and he was adopted from Haiti. So I want to find out a bit more about his story. Maxim-Billy Fortin, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Do you know what? I want to show a photo that's my favorite, and then we're going to go back to the beginning of the story. This photo I created from 3 you sent me, and I call it The Many Phases of Max. That's you as a baby on the left, then as a young boy, and then finally on the right, you're holding two different passports, a Haitian passport and a Canadian passport. So take us back to the beginning. You were adopted from Haiti. How does that story start?
Well, so just to have a little mention about that first picture on the left, that's a picture of my first ever passport. That's right. Thank you, PJ, for bringing the picture. So on the left, it's my first picture, I guess, taken in Haiti, and this is the picture that appears in my very first Haitian passport. So indeed, I was adopted at the age of about 7 months old by French Canadian parents here in Quebec City. So that's bringing us back 1987. So my parents were quite avant-garde in that sense, and wanting to really get out of their usual thing and really want to help. And they were working on adopting a kid for 10 years prior. So that was a long process, even before I was, born. And so that's it. Born in 1986 in Haiti, adopted in 1987, and I arrived here in Quebec City in January 1987.
Can you tell me, I think you told me once that your particular situation was risky because there was tell me a little bit about that, some civil unrest.
Yeah, so I was obviously put into an orphanage when I was born. So the day after I was born, my mom abandoned me into an orphanage, and I guess that's when the process for, sending a kid into other countries and adoption, that's where it started, at the orphanage. And then so obviously communications with parents here in Canada through letters at the time, mostly. And so they would tell my parents that they had to put the babies on the floor because at the time it was war and the bullets were going through the walls. And I remember my parents telling me that when I was a baby coming to Canada, I had night terrors and stuff like that. It was really tough back then.
I imagine. So I have a quick question, and that is about that photo where you're holding two passports. So you obviously feel a connection to your Haitian roots. You feel a connection to that baby who was born in Haiti. How do you feel that it is reflected in the Little Footprints, Big Steps program to be able to reunite children with their roots?
Well, I think that's a very specific detail that a lot of people don't know about, orphanages in Haiti. And because, my first months of life was in an orphanage. That's really deep to my heart, this connection. And I think that people think that maybe if, people get into orphanages that they end up okay. But that's really not the case most of the time. Like Morgan mentioned earlier, a lot of the kids, are in orphanages, still have parents in Haiti. In my case, I think I was very lucky to be adopted and, to end up in, a country like Canada and have very good parents, but not a lot of people have that chance, and they are still in Haiti and they need help.
Morgan, I have a question for you, and that is, can you give us any anecdotes about people, again, it's this idea of finding your roots, Maxim-Billy reclaiming his Haitian heritage. And for you, when you get children reunified with their parents, what is that moment like?
Oh my gosh. It's a very emotional moment. I feel so privileged to have witnessed it. And there are some situations where, parents will break down crying. I've met parents who thought their child was dead because they hadn't heard any news from the child for so long. And it's just overwhelming. I've seen both parents and children, break into tears, and it's different for each family. It's very powerful seeing that exact moment. And then it's also so powerful to see that family and that child a few years down the road. And you'll just see this child become a normal teenager living with his or her parents, having witnessed the situation that they were a part of when they were in the orphanage.
I want to talk to what maybe we don't all accept all the time is that Maxim-Billy, although he looks like he's 12 years old, he's in fact the dad of 3. So you're a dad. Imagine being separated from your children. What does this strike a chord with you in any way, this whole story?
It really does. Let's be clear. I gained my citizenship, my Haitian citizenship back. So this picture where I'm holding the 2 passports, that was back in 2013. And I was still single at the time. And for so many years that Haiti didn't allow dual citizenship. And as soon as they changed the constitution of the country, I went ahead and got my passport for, other projects that I'm doing with sport over there. But to answer your question, indeed, since that I have kids now, just the idea of being separated from your children, It's just it's just haunting me, really. And now when I look at my own children and just thinking the fact that they might be separated from their mother, for instance, I mean, I can't imagine the trauma and whatever effect it would have on the child, you know. And I think that's very, very important to have a system and have resources to really avoid things like that.
I have to say that whole idea of trauma. Morgan, do you guys witness trauma?
Absolutely.
And how do you combat it?
I mean, Maxime mentioned, you know, that his adoptive parents mentioned him having night terrors and whatnot. We've seen definitely, I mean, different children react to trauma differently, but sometimes it's so deeply embedded in the children, both children from orphanages and from the streets. But, you know, there's a lot of bedwetting. Sometimes the children are violent because they've been, I mean, in the orphanage that I experienced living in, they wouldn't only beat the children, they would have the older children beat the younger children. So the children were so aggressive. Sometimes it's a protection mechanism. Sometimes it's the opposite. You know, I remember Alexen, the young man who we spoke about, when he first came out of the orphanage, if he needed to go to the hospital, he would just lay down and he wouldn't know that he had the right to ask to go to the hospital. Or if he was thirsty, he wouldn't know he had the right to go and get water or ask for water or food. So it's, you know, so difficult to see that the difficult thing is that they think that's normal, you know, because that's what they've experienced. And the people who were in a position to be caring for them, you know, that's the example that they showed them. So it's almost like you have to reteach them what their rights are. And, you know, the fact that the way that they were treated was not normal.
Max, I have another question for you, and that is, do you feel by any chance, I mean, I know that you were just months old when you ended up in Canada, but there's a school of thought that feels that babies carry with them experiences, even those that they can't express. Do you think that there are aspects to your life and your personality that were shaped as a result of being in an orphanage?
Absolutely. I think everything about me. And for the longest time, there's a lot of things about me that I didn't know why it was like that. And I think that I had to go really deep and understand. And I had to go back to Haiti mostly to really connect with where I was born, and that was really important. And I think, and I wanted to add something earlier about you know, the orphanage and all that, and it's about, you know, empowering women in relation to, you know, being that today. I think that's really important to, you know, empower women in the process of, let's say, getting birth, or, you know, just a pregnancy in itself. Just looking at my wife, and I'm sure, Morgan, you just had a baby. Just this process, the whole 9 months is super important to empower women, and especially in Haiti, because I mean it's such an important moment of, you know, and when the kid is born, and sometimes I feel that maybe women down in Haiti, they obviously don't have the resources to carry on that wonderful process. And I think that's very important. Empowering women and letting them know that, you know, they can carry on that task, which is obviously hard to be a mom.
It's hard, and it's important work. So what you're doing, Morgan, is you're helping heal the world, and you're helping heal those children. It is just so important. You know what, you guys, we are going to move on to Kelly Milner, who is the producer and director of a documentary that is about Little Footprints, Big Steps, and about your story, Morgan. And the documentary is called Not About Me. It hasn't been released yet, but the first clip that we showed at the top of the show was from one of the trailers. And I'm going to show a second trailer, and then we're going to talk to Kelly all about the documentary about you. So here we go.
So the main program of Little Footprints, Big Steps is family reunification and strengthening, where we work with children who have been separated from their families, either children who are in corrupt and abusive orphanages that the authorities are shutting down, children who've been living in the streets, children in situations of domestic slavery. And once we work with local authorities to reunite those kids with their families, we follow up with each family to make sure that child has access to education and medical care, but most importantly, to address the root cause of why that child was separated from his or her family in the first place, which for the majority of families is poverty. So how do you address the root cause of poverty is by empowering the parents to have a means of income generation to care for their children. So this might mean integrating the parents into our business startup program, supporting them with agriculture and livestock, or even providing vocational training for the children if they're older. Not all children can be reunited with their families immediately, so for those cases, our second main program is transitional housing, where we operate 2 safe houses, one for boys and one for girls. And all of the children admitted to those safe houses are referred to us by local authorities. And it's a place where those children can stay temporarily and get the care they need, but eventually the goal is to either reunite them or have them placed in a long-term home, such as a foster family. And that opens up that space to receive more children. Our third main program is advocacy, where in Haiti, we work to change the mentality of parents and children so that they know their rights, they understand the importance of children living with their families and the dangers that can happen when children are separated. In North America, advocacy for us means helping educate people globally about the dangers of supporting children to be in orphanages and the corruption that often is involved in orphanage systems, and also making them reflect about how to facilitate international aid in a way that is truly impactful to those who we're trying to help. So we definitely don't want to discourage people from helping. The thing is that we need to make sure we're educated about how we're helping. And that means making sure that as we're helping, it's not about how it makes us feel, but it's really about the needs and the change created for those people that we're helping. So that need is still there. It's just about shifting the way that we support those children so that instead of funneling our aid into institutions, we're actually supporting the children to be living with their families and reinforcing the parents and reinforcing the communities. So it's about investing in community development, reinforcing, the child protection authorities that are intervening to protect those children, and supporting stronger families as opposed to institutions.
Morgan, all I can say is wow, which is why I got the sticky fingers going on the wrong buttons. I want to take no more time and just introduce Kelly Milner. Kelly Milner, producer and director from Shot in the Dark Productions. Kelly, thank you so much for all the hard work you do, and welcome. I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's very great to be here.
So I want to know, I'm going to put up in the chat, I'm going to put up where people can actually locate the other location for the real trailer for the movie, as opposed to this one that you produced for Little Footprints, Big Steps. But I want to know, tell me about that moment where you decided that this was a story that you wanted to tell.
Well, I mean, really, when I first was approached, this story came to me in a hard drive. It was an interesting challenge. I'm the fourth filmmaker who has been trying to tell this story. And it was Morgan's mom who actually approached me. There was all this footage. It was 10 years of footage that other filmmakers had been taking of Morgan. And I was approached to see if I wanted to do something with it. And I didn't really know what the story was at all at that point. And I actually kind of blame my husband because I didn't actually know anything about Morgan at the time. I'm from Whitehorse, where Morgan is also from, and I'd heard about Little Footprints, Big Steps. But my husband had actually seen Morgan speak. And so when I said, oh, I got approached to maybe tell a story of this woman, Haiti, Morgan, he said, oh, you have to tell this story because I have 2 daughters. And in our family, we have 3 rules. It's no smoking, listen to your mom, and try. And what my husband said was, Morgan is actually what try really looks like. And so I think, what really clinched it for me was actually the first time meeting Morgan. And, yes, I'm sitting here with this hard drive of footage that really tells this story about this amazing woman. Hi, Morgan. But as I'm sitting there, in our first meeting, she said, I'm glad you want to do this, but I just want to make sure that this film is not going to be about me. And I think that was also really, for me, just such an interesting thing to look at because I'm like, oh, of course this film's going to be about you. It's like all this footage is of you. But I think that that's what was really compelling about this story is really kind of shifting not only my perspective and, in the case of this film, I mean, yes, Morgan is the focus, but she's not the hero. And this really isn't about Morgan. This really is about the rest of us, those of us watching it, to really kind of check what our perceptions are and to really rethink about, how we give. The tagline of the film is good intentions, unintended consequences. And I think I think Morgan's sort of been putting that out. I think it's really taking that time to figure out if we do want to help, how do we do it the right way? And how do we create informed generosity? So if that's the place of this documentary, which I think documentaries are really important ways that we can actually ignite stories and get people talking about things or seeing things in different lights. I hope that this film is a step towards that.
It's a very interesting proposition. And as a filmmaker and as a storyteller, there's a very fine line between representing accurately what's going on, because it's heartbreaking, a lot of what's going on, certainly with children and orphanages in Haiti. So where is that line? How did you find it? And actually, Morgan, how did you make sure that she found it? But I'll go first with you, Kelly.
So in terms of finding the line, I mean, I think really for me, it was meeting people like Alexan, Mika, Odian, some of the other characters that are really important in the story, not about me, and hearing their experiences, but really I think also seeing kind of how I think we have all the preconceived notions of what it means to be an orphan or what an orphanage is or why we have them. And I think, finding that line is really finding that humanity and finding, those places where we can all connect. These are kids. I have kids. I think it's showing them as real people, trying to really connect. I think there's a difference between empathy and sympathy as well. And I think trying to find a way to really to show just all of the things that we can be connected to so that it makes what their experiences are quite real.
I was just going to say, Morgan, how did you feel about being the subject of all of this?
As Kelly mentioned, during my first conversation with her, I really, I felt that if the documentary was just, this is the story of Morgan and what she did, I feel like it would actually be limiting the impact and, what LFBS is, the impact of what we do and the issues that we're trying to raise awareness about. A huge part of what LFBS does is also raising awareness about these issues and encouraging people to, challenge their perspectives, support children and foreign aid in a different way. And And I'm so grateful that Kelly really took to heart what I said and embraced it. And, a lot of the footage that she had inherited was from many years ago. The organization had progressed. I'd learned a lot of lessons. And so she and the film crew took the time in 2018 to come to Haiti, to shadow our team a little bit and see that Little Footprints, Big Steps isn't just Morgan and what I did, but it's really about the partnerships we've built, the team that we've developed, and the families that we work with, the success stories. And so she kind of saw firsthand and was able to capture some of that, but even went a step further to look at the issues of the orphanage system, and the way that foreign aid sometimes has harmful impacts despite good intentions. She also did interviews with Lumos and former UN workers and different people, kind of to validate all of the messages that we're trying to express. And I'm so grateful that she took it to heart and did it the way that she did, because it's exactly what I wanted, was this really to be about the bigger issues, not just about my story.
And I think that's what's lucky. When I go back to that footage, it's one thing to be able to talk about somebody's transformation or what they've learned. What I have and what we were able to work with is footage that actually shows that transition. And so I know there's like points of it that Morgan hates in the film because, it's not all glorious. But I think it's also just really important to see. And I think it's something that's very relatable. I think a lot of people will watch this film and be able to relate to Morgan's sort of arc of learning, because you're also watching it. And I think you can also feel like you're right there with her. So I think that's a really unique piece of this film. It's not about Morgan. I mean, it is about Morgan, but it's more about us kind of seeing this transition and trying to kind of relate that to how we're feeling and learning at the same time.
I would like from you, Kelly, because sometimes the story that we plan is not always the story that happens. So if you could give me a couple of surprises that you were not expecting that have made their way into the story.
Lots. I mean, really, I started this thinking I was doing a 20-minute profile piece of a girl from Whitehorse for a local TV channel. And it's ended up becoming a feature documentary that spans 4 continents. So, yeah. Too. Right? So, yeah. Yeah. So it is a bit different than what I had thought. I think what has been so surprising is also just me challenging my own expectations and my own understanding of things. And I've talked to Morgan about this a lot. I mean, what I've learned since starting this project has really made me rethink how I think about the world, how I think about others, how I look at other countries, how I look at my own privilege. And I mean that in a really profound way. Like, I think that's in some ways maybe the most surprising thing for me with this project. I'm really grateful that I kind of came into it, I would say I thought that I kind of knew what I was doing, and I read some books and I figured that's all I would need to do. But I think the combination of meeting Morgan, of actually going to Haiti and being, part of, some very challenging situations, and also really starting to see, we were really lucky in some ways, not others, but we ended up staying with Little Footprints for a good portion of our time in Haiti. And so instead of them necessarily being sort of the subject of us, arriving in the morning and maybe getting some shots, we were actually embedded in Little Footprints. And so we really saw, like, all day, every day, what was happening, coming and going. And I think that really also gave us a really unique perspective and a real appreciation for the work that the local Haitians are doing as part of this team.
We've got a couple of great comments. This one is for you, Kelly, from Sarah Simmons, who says, great work. She loved what she saw sort of on those trailers. Sarah, you make sure you go to our comments and you take a look at the links that will take you to the Vimeo and to the website to be able to look at a bigger and longer trailer about Not About Me. And then this one is actually for Morgan, and it's from Connie Gasper. This woman and her organization are my heroes. There's a great comment that has just come in, though, that I'd like to share with both of you from Poisson Angelo. saying reunification of a family strengthening program is an example of a sustainable project. The orphanage's business, as I call them, won't be happy. Please don't care about Haitian society. Please don't care about it. Haitian society will be the big winner in the long run. Bravo. Can you both respond to that for me?
I can just, I mean, Morgan can probably talk a little bit more, but one of the things we kind of struggled to look for an ending of our film. And one of the endings that we had for a while was a jury, Haitian Social Services did an assessment of all of the orphanages and looked at which ones needed to be shut down. And then they went through a jury process, which we have in the film, that sort of determines, which orphanages should be left open or closed. And, that was a really interesting aspect for me to look at, okay, so if they are looking at shutting down these orphanages, how will that be responded to? Understanding that this is very much a business. And it is one of the last comments in the film because, that happened almost 2 years ago now. It's a little disappointing to see how little support the Haitian government, even though they're trying very hard to shut these orphanages down. So much of the funding comes from places like in Canada, United States, and it's those organizations that are not necessarily respecting or heeding the call. And so I think that part is disappointing. I see that there's a lot of effort happening from the Haitian government, but I think the business side of it is challenging.
Okay, that's fair. Morgan, how do you respond to that comment?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you, Angelo. I always take it as a huge encouragement when locals who actually understand the situation and see the work that we're doing leave supportive comments or give us compliments. And I know that Angelo actually lives in is from the same region that we work in. To add on to what he said about, obviously, orphanage owners will not be happy with this movement of closing down the orphanages that are operating as for-profit orphanages. Definitely there are situations where it can get a bit dangerous because we are helping close down people's businesses, and not just ourselves, even the local authorities, the Haitian Social Services, I know, have been threatened by orphanage owners when the orphanage is deemed too neglectful and is supposed to be shut down. And like Kelly mentioned, it's a big undertaking that the local authorities have taken, and would be so much more effective if kind of the international aid community got behind them, because we've definitely seen situations where the authorities are trying to close down an orphanage, but the orphanage owner has so much financial support that he's actually able to disregard the local authorities and continue operating an exploitative institution because the funders continue supporting him. So I think it's important for people to realize how much power and influence they have through their donations. And it's not a matter of stopping the support. It's not criticizing you, having good intentions, trying to support these children, but it's about making sure, is your support actually helping these children, or is there a better way to do it where you could actually be supporting families and family reintegration instead of supporting these institutions?
Here is a great comment that's just come in from Emma KS, who worked for a couple of years in Haiti at an orphanage. Similar to your story, lots that they learned about. And Emma dreams of going back and participating in a project in some way, but wants to be sure that she's doing it in an informed way. Great question. Tell me 2 or 3 or whatever, however many things she can do.
I think my first piece of advice would be very picky about the types of programs you're getting involved in. Even with you going down as a volunteer, what type of vetting are they doing? Because I know of foreigners working with children in vulnerable situations who are actually pedophiles and abusing the children. And how was there not a police check? How was there not a background check or more verification before these people were allowed access to children? So definitely make sure that you're getting involved with an organization that has a more thorough vetting process and child protection protocols. And again, be picky about what types of programs you're being involved with. Are they supporting families? Are the programs sustainable and actually empowering the locals? Or is it kind of the aid organization imposing on the beneficiaries what they think that they need? I think it's really important that, the programs, our programs, for example, are developed based on the needs of the families that we work with. It's not us coming and saying, this is what we think that they need. And again, also, is that organization registered with the Haitian authorities? Organizations, orphanages all need to be registered with the local authorities, Haitian Social Services or Haitian Ministry of Affairs, of Social Affairs. So make sure that they are legal in Haiti and respecting all of the norms, and also verify, are they actually supporting the Haitian people in a sustainable way that empowers them instead of creating further dependency?
I have a great question for Kelly. It's out of my own head. No comment this time, Kelly. I just want to know 2 takeaways from this project for you as a filmmaker and for you as a mom and general human being.
I think that this film has just been as someone who likes to tell stories that matter. I think this one in particular has been a really great one for that. I think realizing the amount of power that this story could possibly have. We've been working with Morgan to develop a campaign specific to high schools and colleges to get kind of at that last question, like, I want to help, but how do I do it the right way? We really want to start some conversations around how we can have more informed generosity, and also really look at those sort of key age groups, like Morgan's age when she went to Haiti. How do you make some good choices about how do you go help and volunteer, which can be sort of foundational. And I would say as a mom, I mean, my daughter is prime for that. I think having these conversations and really thinking about, I think there's lots of young people out there that's like, I'm going to go out, save the world. That's what's so great about them. But let's make sure that we're targeting them and sending them in the right direction. And I'm really excited that this is going to be part of this film, but that we want to get this into schools. We've got discussion guides, and all sorts of activities that teachers and students can do.
It's all about education. At the end of the day, everything comes back to education and to people learning lessons and learning things that they can carry forward in their lives. That's absolutely outstanding. Morgan, we're going to put you on the hot seat. You're going to give us your final thoughts. Let's have a little piece of hopefulness, what you're looking forward to as time goes on for Little Footprints, Big Steps.
We have a lot of ambitious, I think what I really want people to take away is, again, there is a need for us to support others. I think as humans, inherently, we need to support each other. And there are a lot of needs that we can help fill. But again, it's about making sure we do it in the right way. Just because a family is impoverished doesn't mean that separating the child from their parents is a solution. And it seems so logical that that's not a positive thing. And yet in so many different countries, we're perpetuating it. So again, just recognizing the importance of keeping families together and helping, again, with informed generosity, like Kelly said. I'm excited because now that we have, 10 years of experience, we've started to learn what works and what doesn't, best practices. We've forged these really strong partnerships with the local authorities. And the Haitian government is really promoting this movement away from institutionalization and towards family reunification and preservation. So it's exciting to see the potential of what organizations like Little Footprints, Big Steps can do in that situation with the right support.
You know what? This hour has absolutely flown by. People, if they want information, can go to the website, littlefootprintsbigsteps.com. and they can find out all of the information that they're looking for. And you know what? As I said before, I'm just going to say it again, and that is, Morgan, you are an earthbound angel. So thank you so much for talking to me. Everybody else, I want you to make sure that you do your part and really consider the options that you have when you're trying to help others out. We're thinking about little footprints, big steps. Morgan Wienberg, Kelly Milner, and Maxim-Billy Fortin, thank you so much for joining us. This has been wonderful. Bye for now.